The African Transformation Movement will not participate in the motions of no confidence made against President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet in Parliament today. The ATM first lodged the motion with the office of the Speaker in early 2020, but there have been numerous postponements. The ATM spokesperson, Sibusiso Mncwabe, says the decision was taken because the matter is still before the courts.
But what makes us not to be even more unhappy is the behavior and the conduct of the Speaker of Parliament. You know, it's a well-known thing that when the matter is sub judice before courts, obviously everything holds, everything goes to a standstill waiting for the court's decision. Yes, we did wrote to her asking her to postpone this debate pending the finalization of the matter by the High Court in the Western Cape. And she denied us that opportunity, insisting that the matter must go ahead. And definitely we are not happy about that. And we are not going to participate in that kind of a debate where we know very well that the matter is before court and we are applicants for that matter. And we find it strange that the Speaker continues to behave this way.
All right, let's get some more detail around this story. We're joined in studio by our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo. Ziyanda, good morning to you. The first question I'd like to deal with has to do with the ATM having been the sponsors of the motion of no confidence against the president. We'll talk about the Democratic Alliance against cabinet. The fact that they're not participating in this motion of no confidence, yes, they've put out their reasons, but what should we read into that?
I think it is quite fair to say that because they didn't get their postponement and that they're still reviewing then the Western Cape High Court's decision that this matter should not be heard on an urgent basis is fair in the sense that just because it was dismissed on the basis of urgency, there's still the part where the arguments may still be substantial. So, but there are still questions, remember, that were posed towards the ATM as to why they waited 2 days before this sitting to actually file that urgent court interdict. They could have done it on the 16th of February, as was heard in court, a few days ago. I think what some may be reading into it, Xoli, is what has been said about the ATM, that they are actually a proxy of a faction within the ANC. And so by virtue of that, perhaps some within the ANC's caucus. It could also boil down to a numbers game, which is what I think you are alluding to, them not participating today. Because remember, ATM actually was a part of those opposition parties that met on the 15th of March to discuss this motion of no confidence against the president. Ultimately, it does boil down to the numbers, and with the DA saying, no, 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 we want to tackle the cabinet and not necessarily the president, it may also ultimately deal a heavy blow with whatever those discussions with the opposition parties yielded in terms of how they're going to vote and what numbers they would have managed to garner with some from within the ANC, because that is ultimately what is needed here.
Then let's talk about the motion of no confidence against the cabinet. This morning, I can't reveal names, but managing to get a hold of a senior member of the ANC who sits in the NEC. And I got a sense from him that he is very unhappy or uncomfortable about a motion of no confidence that will be debated against President Cyril Ramaphosa's executive, and none of the ministers are lining up to defend their honor, so to speak, or to defend their work in government. Do you think that he has a point, that this cabinet seems very comfortable that they are sort of in charge and there's nothing to worry about, really?
There is some credence to that, in the sense that if you look at how the factions within the ANC have played out publicly, you will always see the RET faction. They are probably the loudest between the two factions, whereas you could argue that, in fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa's faction is mild and pales in comparison to the RT faction. But you could also then say, just because they're not making noise, it doesn't mean that there aren't plans in motion behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And which would be, one, consolidating the ANC caucus, that they're all together. But two, now that, you know, the motion, is, especially the one on cabinets, I should say, that one is not going to be secret, right? And the Speaker of Parliament has rejected the DA's application to say the cabinet ministers must be excused from this particular vote because there's a conflict of interest. Of course, if you are a minister, you're not going to vote against yourself insofar as whether or not you're doing well. But also, they have a belief that this prerogative ultimately lies with the president in terms of them being hired. So their allegiance is to President Cyril Ramaphosa ultimately.
Finally, talking about a motion of no confidence that's going to be debated against the president and his cabinet, the man himself, a very busy schedule for him today. He's going to be addressing a conference, an elective conference of the National Union of Mine Workers, including a cabinet, by the way, that he is meant to be chairing. It's a Wednesday today. We know that it is Cabinet Day. Does that talk to this posture of really not being worried?
I don't think the president worries, to be honest, Xoli. And I think knowing how the president is, he's like, let the process unfold, you know, in and of itself. I don't think he's got much to worry about when it comes to the motion against him, because, again, I said, in terms of the numbers, it's not looking good. When you look at the cabinet one, I think it's more of an optics thing for the opposition, for the DA to say, look at how your representatives feel about their performance. That ultimately affects you when you're talking about the petrol price, when you're talking about the unemployment rate, when you're talking about all these social ills, really, that are piling up. Because remember, what the National Assembly Speaker did accede to, which the DA is really taking as a victory, is that the chief whip won't be able to say, I have 200 votes and we all vote in this way. What's going to happen is that each and every MP, regardless of their political party, will individually say whether they say yes, no, or abstain to this particular motion of no confidence against the cabinet. And what you actually need to be paying attention to is the abstentions, because those will tell you about those who are on the fence. And that is the most interesting part about all of this.
Very interesting thought indeed there. Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much for that analysis.